Alright, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. Made some changes to this deck that I've been working on, and I have some great games coming up for you. I don't want to do too deep of a dive, I suppose, into the changes, other than that I've basically had to adjust my curve and increase the number of cards that I play, which are good at fighting against blue decks, because they're all over the place. The trick is I'm looking for cards that are good against blue decks that don't have, tank in value against other decks. So, for example, Abrupt Decay is just generally good. Livinia is just generally good. Cavern of Souls can be mana fixing, color fixing, generally good. Delighted Halfling is still mediocre, I would say, but it's still can function as a bird of paradise for things like Leovold and Oko and Teferi and all these cards. And in the meantime, it's still a 1 mana. It's half a Soul Ring, right? Sort of, and not bad, right? Still reasonably good, and so on and so forth. So, anyway, so if you have an opportunity, if you saw the video, there have been a number of changes. Definitely worth maybe pausing and kind of looking through them, and then you can kind of decide for yourself what you think about them. For these games, though, that I'm going to jump into, I think the only difference is that I did not have COP Red in my sideboard, but I will never use it. My opponent's not playing red, as it turns out. This is just something that after the fact I realized was an oversight here, because I believe that a very simple way to beat this deck would potentially just be to go real hard on aggressive strategies, and something like that could potentially be quite problematic if I don't have a game plan, at least in games 2 and 3. So Cop Red gives me something of a game plan, along with the Zern Orb and the Hydroblast and the Blue Elemental Blast. I've got 4 cards against like a burn strategy, and I think that's got to be it. I can't overdo it, but I think without this, these other cards just buy time to do nothing. With this, these cards buy time to find this so that I can win the game. Or, I can always put my combos together and stuff. But anyway, that is where I'm at. And let's jump right into the games now. And for this, let's see. Played today, format, vintage, yeah. And you can see here I got a couple of... I basically just got raffle stomped by Vintage doing Vintage things, although I did win, I guess, this one game. I suppose I can run through those, but I think what's really interesting is this match against Pazooie, so I think I'll just go straight to that. We can take a look. So, game 1. And let's take a look at my opening hand. And I figure, not having any idea at all what my opponent's playing, this opening hand is probably a keep, just because this allows me to dig for some lands. I have Force and Negation for something crazy if my opponent starts out that way. And if I can find the lands that I'm going to be trying to dig for, I can maybe turn 2 Time Walk, turn 3 like Oko, and that's actually really solid. Or turn 2 Time Walk, turn 3 Vindicate, and then Oko, something like that. And so I have a curve, a reasonable game plan. This seems like a keep to me. And I am going first, which is critical here as well to making that look like a keep. So I'm going to go ahead and preordain, and I tuck away a Supreme Verdict, again not knowing what my opponent's playing, and take a Rainforest here. And my opponent leads off with Mana Crypt, and I do not want to be 2 turns behind in mana, so I'm going to attempt to force a negation right away. So I decide I'm going to force with the Brainstorm. And fortunately it sticks. My opponent has a land, but so I don't get an easy win here, but at least that's it. Alright, so what I really want to do right now is I want to Time Walk, and then I want to find any land and play Oko or a Mox. So I'm going to Time Walk, and I don't find it, so I have to kind of do the ugly thing of regrowing a land, but reverse Sinkhole, but sometimes you do what you got to do. My opponent has an Academy, but no Crypt to go with it, thankfully. So that's really nice. I'm going to go ahead and fetch at the end of turn here, because I know that I want white. So I might as well get my tapped Hallowed Fountain. This is obviously a play that you're just not if you're a vintage player, you're like, what is even going on here? I have added Vindicate to the deck 4 cards like Academy and Library of Alexandria. And in this case, since my opponent's Academy is somewhat stranded, I can attack their mana here and then potentially follow it up with a really powerful Planeswalker against an opponent that doesn't really seem to be doing much. It also is a way to test for Force of Will. These are actually more important cards. I draw Balance. That might be nice later. Let's go ahead and Narset, and I Narset into Fracture and nothing else, so I have to take the Fracture, but that's not bad. Kill an artifact, enchantment, or Planeswalker is good. Especially since my opponent's playing Academy and is probably going to be playing artifacts. Sure enough, down comes the Time Vault. And this turn, I drew that Supreme Verdict again. So I dig and I find a Mox Ruby as well as, that went a little bit quick. But basically, I was looking for more mana, and so I did find it. And here, unfortunately, it's not, white would have been ideal here. But anyway, because if I cast Fracture using a Hallowed Fountain and an Underground Sea on the Time Vault, just out of fear for the card, I don't have another way to make... I can't cast Oko as well this turn, which is something that I would prefer to do. So if it had been a Sapphire or a Emerald or a Pearl, I would be able to make that play, or even a Onyx. As a matter of fact, if it had been any of the other Moxes at all, I would be able to make that play because I could tap my mana in such a way that I would be able to, let's say Onyx, I meant Jet. I'd be able to attack my way in such a way that I'd be able to cast Oko here, I believe. I think Jet would get me there. Yeah, because with Jet and Fountain, I would be able to, anything except Ruby, basically. But I'm still glad I got at least a mana source. So I'm going to go for the Fracture. I take that out because it's just too scary to have a Time Vault in play. I'd really like to attack my opponent's mana, but it's so dangerous if I do that and I don't. And then they follow it up with like Voltaic Key. I'm just in big trouble. So Spellseeker off the top looks real good. I'm going to go ahead and cast it here with leaving Balance mana available for me. And I'm going to grab an Ancestral and pass for the turn, I believe, so that I can Ancestral during their upkeep. In this case, with the Snapcaster on this deck, I'll Ancestral in response since they're tapped out. And they threw the Snapcaster down to kill Narset, so the Spellseeker was incredibly timely here because that was their way out of the Narset trap. When it goes for Dak Fade and steals my Ruby, it's unfortunate, but I at least have Narset protected here. I'm going to go ahead and block. Now my opponent's up to 5 mana, so quite scary. And then I just rip Time Twister off the top and go for it. I could have tapped Library to draw, which is what I was planning to do, but with the Time Twister off the top, opponent's down to just 2 cards in hand now, so the card they drew plus their draw step. So things are looking much, much better. And I still have Library active here. All right, and it looks like nothing's going on. I'm going to tap the Library, hoping there's no Notion Thief or anything coming out. Looks safe. And I'll go ahead and Enlighten Tutor. I've got a Time Vault. Let's try to put together the combo and just see if I can win. So I go for Key. I'll go ahead and draw for Library. I go for Vault. And my opponent has a Mana Drain. And I probably should have thought this through a little bit further because this is actually quite dangerous. I've now put a Key into play against a deck that I know has Time Vault. So I could actually have been fueling my own loss here. My opponent Notion Thieves and then Dak Fadens to plus, forcing me to attempt to draw 2, but I can't. So I discard 2, and then my opponent's rewarded by drawing, but they can't. So they just basically, Dak Faden is now target player discards 2 cards, which is brutal. So I throw away Balance and an Island and Tithe for a Scrub. And I've got to do something about that Notion Thief, but I've got that one covered at least. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to put Leovold into play as just a safety play, so that I can so that Narset's still relatively safe. And I'm going to go ahead and attempt to solve the equation here with a Swords to Plowshares. Hope it sticks. It does. I didn't want to. So my opponent only had 1 card, so they couldn't force a negation with a second card. But if they had a counter, like if they did have Force of Negation or Mental Misstep, there's no countering that I can do there. However, if I wait till my opponent's upkeep to plow, and they untap, they can actually hardcast Force of Will. So this is 2, 3, 4, 5. So this was definitely correct to play it on my turn and not their upkeep. For my opponent's turn, they Dak Faden to steal the Key, which is a big sign that they probably have the second half of the combo. I go ahead and draw a card off of Leovold, finding Workshop. This should be Cavern of Souls now. It is, but anyway, it was Workshop here. So in response, I'm going to go ahead and fetch, and I fetch for a Mystic Sanctuary, and I Sanctuary back, solve the equation on top of my deck. And then I go ahead and tap the Voltaic Key to untap my Mox Pearl, so that if my opponent does slam down the Time Vault here, they can't instantly just win the game on the spot. Alright, and then for my turn, I'm going to go ahead and solve the equation once more. In this case, the equation is, it's a little bit risky here, but I decided that the best play I can make is probably Ancestral Recall. And my opponent does, in fact, have a hard cast Force of Will, so I could have been in big trouble there. But I can at least start applying some fairly significant pressure here. Sure would like to be able to play a Cavern of Souls right now and have Opposition Agent under that. But I'm going to hold my cards for Library of Alexandria and keep attacking and hope that I don't just instantly die to TV, Time Vault. Opponent plays a Flooded Strand, which is potentially good news. And then because I can, so I'm going to swing in with Leovold here, and then because I can Caracas Leovold back to my hand to activate a library, I'm going to play the Caracas, but I still have the same number of cards in my hand secretly. But this at least means that it's very hard for my opponent to deal with Leovold, because, you know, they might have like a removal for him, like Swords to Plowshares or Bolt or something. But then you know, I'll draw a card and get to Caracas him back. And while that will get him off the board, there's still the Narset in play. So it's not even super great for my opponent to make that play. So, but getting the library on board seems very important as soon as I can. So because the Caracas does not actually shrink my hand size due to the ability to pick Leovold up, it just made sense. So I go ahead and get the Caracas down. It also protects me against, you know, a potential... It doesn't protect me against like a Notion Thief, but having both of these in play means that Notion Thief's a much less of a threat. It's up to K-Wire Might. I'm not going to play around with holding cards to try to get up to library. When one of those cards saves me from losing the game, because now I can exile Time Vault if it gets played, and also gives me the ability to chump block if my opponent plays like makes another play like they did before. Like if they flash out a Snapcaster, I can block and then sack to remove the key from the game, and my opponent won't even get to kill my Narset, which is really nice. So, of course, I have Opposition Agent waiting for something similar. My opponent fetches, and in response, I am going to flash the Opposition Agent, because it would be nice to have another card in hand to later get a card with Library of Alexandria, but this gets a card right now. It gets me a Volcanic Island, in fact, and costs my opponent the mana, so that's pretty good. Opponent taps some mana and then thinks better of it. Alright, for his turn, goes for a Time Walk. Time Walk right here is just a mulligan. It's just a redraw. I'm not going to do anything in response to that. That's fine. Goes for a Bolt on Leovold, and here's that exact play I was talking about. So they've got to get Leovold off the table, right? So they Bolt Leovold, and I draw a card, and then I Caracas it back to my hand. And there's my opponent's library. And now I'm back up to 5 cards in hand. And I decide that I am going to hold them. It doesn't actually increase my clock. My opponent's down to 4 life. So depending on how this goes, I figured I probably should have actually cast Leovold there just for some little additional safety, perhaps. But this just kind of gave me a way to... if my opponent had like a sweeper, I still have a follow-up play this way, and also I'm real close to using the library. So like if my opponent were to play, say, Toxic Deluge for 2, dropping to 2 life, I can exile the Manifold Key and gain my 2 life, and then the Opposition Agent will die because there's nothing I can do about that. But I still have Leovold in hand, and I can draw, pass, draw, and then start using my Library of Alexandria and win that way. So with that, my opponent draws, though they have no Deluge, no answer to these, and we'll take 4 damage and die next turn. So we move on to game 2. So I make whatever sideboard decisions that I think. Basically, I take out most of my 1-mana tutors, and my opponent leads off like this, and I know I'm dead. I'm 1 mana short of interacting with that Voltaic Key, and yeah, totally dead. My only hope was my opponent missed a land drop, and then I could go and slam Lauren and kill that key before the time vault that I knew my opponent got. Or if my opponent missed a land drop here and just like tapped 2 mana and played a time vault, like, you know, with no mana to untap it with the key, then I could have won that game. But this start, not beatable, so we just move on to game 3. It is going to happen sometimes. You're just going to die like that, but it's okay. All right, on to game 3. So I take a mulligan, and I decide to keep this hand here, and I mulligan down to this. It's risky, but I'm going to slam the One Ring. I'm going to attempt to get it into play. My opponent's mulligan to 6. If my opponent has Force of Will or Force of Negation, I can misdirect that. And at this point, I'd probably misdirect it with... it's tough. Which one would I choose, you know? But anyway, I'd misdirect it with one of these 2 cards. And then if they have another Force, then I'm probably hosed. But with that in mind, I think I would misdirect with Counterspell just so that I have at least something I can play on the next turn. But fortunately, none of that happened, so I get to slam the One Ring into play and activate it immediately. There's a card I'm much happier to misdirect with, potentially, although it is an Ancestral. But you don't really need Ancestral when you have an active One Ring running. Opponent gets turn 1 Demonic Tutor, so I figure the One Ring isn't long for this world, and I have no land. I have a Counterspell in hand. It's so frustrating. Goes for a Time Vault. I am definitely going to Spell Snare that if I could. My opponent Flusterstorms here, and I'm thinking I have misdirection, so if my opponent had a Flusterstorm that was only for 2, I could Fluster one of the Flusters to target the other one of the upstream ones, so the first one would resolve and target the other one, and then a Flusterstorm for 2 can be countered with a misdirection, but a Flusterstorm for 3 cannot, so rough. Vault comes down. I might be dead here if he has a Mox and a key. I really need to draw some land here. I'm also taking some fairly significant damage. Oh, Pearl, beautiful. Let's get that Time Vault off the board right now. Thank you. And this is before my opponent untaps. Obviously, you know, I could sit on a Counterspell, but Counterspells are pretty weak when your opponent's running Flusterstorm. Not garbage, but definitely not as good, not at their best. And look at that. He's got the key. Goes for a Snapcaster into Ponder. This is all whatever. All fine. I've already Spell Snared the... so I can't stop the Snapcaster. Unfortunately, I don't have a Lavinia down to stop those Moxes, but I do find a Plow, so we'll get that off the board since I'm under some pressure. And I don't see a reason to tap and draw here and then discard, so I'm going to tap during my opponent's upkeep. And that way I'm sitting on... So the reason I did that during my opponent's upkeep is I know I miss a land drop here, but I didn't want to like just tap to draw 1 land and that's it. So I do it during their upkeep, knowing they have 2 cards, and if one of them's a Notion Thief, so they or like Orcish whatever, or Hull Breacher, they cast it. I have 2 mana to counterspell. They Flusterstorm, and I'm hosed. But if it's not Flusterstorm, if it's just like a Force of Will or something, or another counterspell, then I could misdirect it. So that's why I waited till upkeep to go for it. It was slightly risky, but it was a calculated risk, and my opponent didn't have anything here. So all right, so they're going for a Snapcaster. I'm going to attempt to counter that, and look at that, another Flusterstorm. So brutal. Not a thing that I have to worry about in Singleton. All right, but I'm kind of okay with all this because my opponent has exactly 2 mana floating and 1 mana untapped. So what do they go get? 100% of the time, right? Ancestral Recall. And if you're my opponent, you probably should Ancestral right now. I mean, Force of Negation's a thing to worry about, but I've shown Counterspell, so like, why let me untap? So I figured he's going to Ancestral now, and then I'm going to misdirect it back and just be crushing, right? I still have to worry about this One Ring. It's slowly killing me. But that doesn't happen, which is very interesting. So I'm going to go for Lavinia here, and then I'm going to go ahead and Merchant Scroll. And if they're going to let me, if my opponent's just going to let me do all this, I'm going to go put a Force of Will in my hand. And sure enough, it all happened. So let's throw away the Mana Confluence and Sylvan. My life is way too low for Sylvan. I sideboarded the Sylvan in. I'm going to go, in fact, I'm going to even trade off my Lavinia, strong as the card is, because life is far more important. I don't even tap the One Ring there because I'm calculating how many turns I have, and if I do tap there, I actually shave an entire turn off. I would have taken 5 damage during my upkeep. Anyway, so for my turn, if you saw, I used my blue fetch to go fetch a Mystic Sanctuary. I used Sanctuary to put Prismatic Ending on top of my library. And then I went ahead and activated my One Ring and drew 4, which include Prismatic Ending. I'm now going to go for a Prismatic Ending with double free counter magic backing it up, plus a Veil of Summer. So what am I going to exile? That scary Voltaic Key? No, absolutely not. I'm going to exile the card that's going to kill me next turn. The One Ring, my own One Ring. I just got to get rid of that sucker. Alright, so it's gone. And at the end of my opponent's turn, they think about making a play, a Notion Thief, which is really, I think, a mistake here, because now I have less cards that I have to discard. Anyway, I forced the Notion Thief. My opponent goes to the Ancestral Recall that we knew he had, and I'm going to go ahead and misdirect that. And I'm just trying to decide which of these 3 cards to use, and I decide, hey, I'll use my Wrath of God. So I'm going to misdirect that back to me, and I'll Ancestral. Thank you very much, opponent. Throw away the cards that deal damage to me or don't look particularly juicy. I've got a Crucible of Worlds out ready to go anyway, and now we're just playing a classic control game. I'm going to strip mine 3 of my opponent's mana in one shot and do absolutely nothing, because I have a Veil of Summer and a Hull Breacher. I counter that there because the card that they probably go get could potentially be something that I can't counter. And if it is, I could get myself into a lot of trouble at 4 life. So I'm just going to go ahead and counter that and attack their mana very aggressively here. Go ahead and slam Jace, plus it, zero it, and sit on my Veil of Summer. I'm not even swinging with a Hull Breacher into a potential Snapcaster. Just seems like a really bad play. Opponent plays Soul Ring here. Has with Soul Ring and Key, they've got quite a bit of mana actually. However, I'm going to play Crucible, take out that Underground Sea, plus, and leave a Force of Will on top of their deck. Snapcaster back a Fragmentize, and let's nuke that Soul Ring. And now it's safe to send in the Hull Breacher. I've got Snapcaster to protect my life total, as well as my Chase. Opponent gets a land there, so we know the last card in my opponent's hand is Force of Will, so I can safely swing in. And bounce my Snapcaster, recast Snappy, and now it's time to Prismatic Ending once again, taking out more and more of my opponent's mana. I'm going to go ahead and preordain into a sideboard card, so I've got 2 sideboard cards in my hand. Opponent's still sitting on their Force of Will. Alright, end of my opponent's turn, or on my turn rather, I'm just going to strip mine their blue source. Of course, they're going to turn it into a real land, and then I'm going to go ahead and strip mine that. Go ahead and Jace. And regrowth a Lavinia. Let's throw down Lavinia so that Force of Will in their hand is totally dead. And even if they draw a blue card now, because it prevents them from casting spells greater than the number of lands they control. And my opponent says, I see why you set the clock to 60 minutes. You literally couldn't win otherwise. And I said, not with my 100 card Singleton deck. No, you're right. But I thought it might be, it was kind of interesting that my opponent was not, it was interesting that they got a little bit salty, and I do understand that this is a pretty horrible position to find yourself in, trapped under Lavinia, Hull Breacher, Strip Mine lock, but probably even worse when you're a full 4 of everything vintage deck, you know, and you're getting smashed by a 100 Singleton deck. So when he got salty with me, I figured I'd rub that exact salt back into the wound. And that was it. So you can see I had a couple of losses. I guess I can run through these. I don't think that they're generally too interesting. They were just pure vintage. Like, I'll hit play, but you'll get the idea in a moment, obviously. Also, this was, I hadn't quite made all of the adjustments that you've seen in the current version of the deck. I mean, first turn, Sylvan Library looks really good. My opponent goes for Deafening Silence, so that's not going to work out, and then has a Thalia, but I do have Caracas, so yeah, let's get rid of that. And puke out a ton of mana, and then sure, you can play Thalia, but opponent follows it up with Kataki. It's kind of gnarly, but I can use Grim to pay for all this, so I will. Then I can get Sylvan down. And then I should be in good shape, you would think. Leovold was not exactly what I was looking for here, but I'm going to leave Kataki in play. Of course, I want my opponent to pay for his Mox, and then I'll bounce it at the end of their turn. So, sure. And my opponent plays Spirit of the Labyrinth, which completely shuts off Sylvan Library. And look, I've got Supreme Verdict, and I'm going to go ahead and save you time. I never draw another land and literally just can't play the game. I just keep bouncing, futilely trying to bounce my opponent's cards until pretty soon there's 2 of them and then 3 of them and then I'm dead. Just awful. And game 2 went similarly, so, you know, it's just kind of, it is what it is. Vintage is not really what this deck is designed for, but I do my best to be competitive with my Singleton deck, but there are some things that I just simply cannot beat. And here you can see I've got a heck of a start, but this is another one of those Luris decks with a million Force of Wills and all the usual suspects. I thought. It actually turned out it was a combo deck, so I was totally unprepared to deal with it. But I have a heck of a start, right? Well, my opponent's got a pretty good one too. But that's not bad. I don't mind seeing the Hermit Druid there too much. I do have to kill it, like, right now. Because if I don't, if that Hermit gets activated, I lose on the spot. Opponent has Force of Will here. And I mana leak the Force of Will, and I think this was maybe a mistake because, well, there was nothing I could do, right? If I misdirect it, then I don't have the mana leak. And my opponent just falls with another Hermit Druid, and I die. So, if you want to know how this works, opponent, well, I'll show you. Obviously, my opponent will show you. Would be more accurate. So you activate Hermit Druid, mill your whole deck, pause. So this is what happens when Hermit Druid gets activated. This is the whole deck. So they mill the whole deck. All the Narcomoebas jump out. They play Dread Return for free. They can Cabal Therapy for free as well. So they Cabal Therapy, naming whatever. Then they Dread Return, and the Dread Return targets Stasis Oracle. I can't get away from this card, and then I die. And then that's what happens in game 2. At that point, I said, you know what? I really have a removal problem in this deck, and then that's when I made all the adjustments. So it was before the deck was built the way that it's built now. I made all the adjustments to increase the removal significantly, adding Drown and I brought some of these other cards, Vindicate and so on and so forth, and you saw what happened in the last match. Worked out pretty well. So hopefully you enjoyed yourself. It's a lot of fun playing this deck. It's a lot of fun trying to face these insane vintage decks. I would very much enjoy it if I could manage to find some opponents from some of you. Hopefully someone interested in building and playing with this very unique and interesting format. I wouldn't say very unique, but this every card in your deck is unique. We'll say it that way. Anyway, so that's all I've got for now, though. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.